This happened just last month. I'm 32 now and returned to my grandmother's old farmhouse after she passed away. I wouldn't say I was a writing expert, but as a freelance writer, I hope to find some inspiration there. The house was full of memories from my childhood. I thought maybe I could tap into that. The farmhouse sat at the end of a long, winding dirt road. The fields around it had grown wild. I could smell a faint aroma when I stepped inside. It reminded me of baked bread but also something burnt. The kitchen was stuck in time. The old floral wallpaper was peeling and the vintage furniture was covered in dust. On my first night back, I noticed the old stove in the corner. It looked out of place, but it was still warm. No one had touched it. I figured it was just an old quirk. I pushed my unease aside. A wave of nostalgia washed over me. As the week went on, things got weirder. The stove continued to radiate heat, sometimes warm enough to make my skin prickle. I found small, handwritten recipes tucked away in my grandmother's recipe box. They hinted at things I didn't understand: a strange stew with a pinch of family and another for something called lost memories. I felt a chill run down my back but couldn't shake my curiosity. One evening, I was alone in the kitchen. The air felt thicker. Suddenly, I saw a shadow moving behind the stove. My heart raced as I turned around, but nothing was there. I shrugged it off as a trick of the light. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I peeked behind the stove, half hoping to find a loose wire or just a draft. But it was just dust and cobwebs. My breaths turned shallow. Maybe I was just being silly, but the stove twisted something deep inside me. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the warmth coming from the stove. I questioned whether it was malfunctioning or if it was connected to my grandmother's past. I remembered her stories about family, love, and loss. But they felt distant now. Just when I thought I could relax, I heard a whisper. It was soft but clear. It sounded like my name. My heart dropped. I looked around the room. My eyes scanned the kitchen, my stomach churning. I felt trapped. Then, I heard it again, clearer this time. Come closer. I felt compelled to move. My legs carried me towards the stove, almost as if I wasn't in control. The warmth intensified. Why are you here? I whispered back, almost scared to disturb the haunting silence. The stove flickered. The air grew colder. I didn't know what to do. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision. I had to leave. I turned to run, but in my mind, I felt something holding me back. In that moment, the stove let out a loud clang. I jumped back, heart pounding. Memories of my grandmother flooded my mind: her laughter, her love, her fear. The whispers surrounded me again. We're waiting. I stumbled out of the kitchen, shivering. As I closed the door behind me, I looked back one last time. The shadows in the kitchen felt alive. I couldn't stay there anymore. I had to leave. I spent the night in a restless fog. In bed, I replayed the events from earlier. Each whisper echoed in my mind like a haunting lullaby, luring me back to the kitchen I had just escaped. I kept wondering if it was my imagination or something I wasn't meant to understand. As dawn broke, the memories of my grandmother felt sharper, more vivid. Determined to confront my fears, I rose with the sun. The house creaked around me as I made my way to the kitchen, the floorboards protesting under my weight. I hesitated outside the door. I felt nauseous but knew I had to face what was there. I opened the door slowly, half expecting the stove to start whispering again. To my surprise, everything was quiet. I walked inside, scanning the room for any sign of the unease that had gripped me. The stove still radiated warmth, but it seemed to have settled back into stillness. I took a deep breath and approached it. At that moment, I noticed something new: a small shimmer peeking out from the side of the stove. It looked like a piece of folded paper. Curiosity pulled me closer. I knelt down to reach for it. As my fingers brushed against the edge of the paper, I heard the whisper again, but this time it wasn't my name. Instead, I felt a presence, an old, familiar feeling, my grandmother's love. Overwhelmed by conflicting emotions, I snatched the paper and unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. The note read, "The past isn't gone, it waits to be felt. Let it guide you." The message sent chills crawling up my spine. What did "let it guide you" mean? My heart raced again, but I couldn't deny the pull of this strange occurrence. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from behind me. I whipped around, heart racing. The kitchen door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Panic set in. I grabbed the paper tightly and ran to the door, yanking on the handle. It wouldn't budge. I felt heat rising from the stove, almost as if it were watching me. Then, the whispers returned. "Remember us." They swirled around me like leaves in a storm, wrapping around my thoughts. I pressed my back against the door, my fingers trembling against the wooden surface. Every part of me wanted to scream, to break free, but then I noticed something in the stove's warm glow. A fire pit filled with ash glowed faintly. Staring at it, I had a thought. What if I poured something inside? I remembered the recipes. The strange ones that spoke of lost memories. Maybe that was the answer. Releasing the handle, I rushed back to the recipe box. I started flipping through the cards, sweat dripping down my back. I finally found one that intrigued me. It spoke of a memory broth, using ingredients like soul and thyme. I paused. What did that even mean? Before I could process it, the whispers surged, louder than before. "Find us." They commanded, and I felt filled with dread and urgency. And then everything went dark. I gasped as I suddenly fell to the floor. The air around me felt thick and cold, and disorienting shadows danced in the corners of the kitchen. My heart pounded in my chest, the whispering voices now replaced with an eerie silence. I pushed myself to sit up, my hands trembling as I touched the cool surface of the tile beneath me. Light flickered back into the room, and I was back in the kitchen, with everything seemingly untouched. Confusion swirled in my mind. Had I fainted? I glanced around, trying to gather my bearings. The note fluttered in my hand, as if urging me to pay attention. The kitchen felt different, charged, alive. I felt a sudden pull toward the stove, as if it were beckoning me. The fire pit was still warm, barely smoking. I remembered the memory broth and the strange ingredients. There had to be more to this than just cooking. I looked through the recipe box once more, searching for anything that made sense. Most of the recipes were faded and tough to read, true relics of my grandmother's handwritten notes. I flipped past those until I saw another card that caught my eye. It was one that referenced the essence of time. What did that mean? I hadn't noticed it before. My hands moved quickly, grabbing it and reading the list of ingredients: moments of joy and sorrow, a sprinkle of laughter, tears for the soul. It was so vague, yet something within me twisted at the mention of laughter and tears. Then I noticed something on the countertop, an old jar with a faded label. I reached for it, dusting off the remnants. The label read Grandma's Essence. It felt like a small miracle. Is this what I need? I whispered to myself. Taking a deep breath, I unscrewed the lid and smelled it. The scent wafted up, rich and familiar, a mix of spices that reminded me of cozy afternoons in her kitchen. It felt right. Heart racing, I decided to combine it with the ashes already in the fire pit. I poured the contents of the jar into the glowing ashes, watching as it sizzled and popped. The whispers returned, a gentle chorus intertwining with my memories. "We are here, remember." The warmth enveloped me. But then the flame sprang to life, bright and wild. I stepped back, startled, as the light formed an outline of a figure above the stove. A voice broke through the chaos, clearer than before. You need us, and we need you. Terror clawed at my throat. What had I done? As the figure began to take a more definite shape, I realized I stood on the edge of something profound. The whispers turned urgent again, drowning out my thoughts. Find the truth, embrace the past. That's when I saw it, a reflection, not in the flames but behind me in the dark corner of the room. A shadow shifted, and I turned, breath hitching in my throat. There was someone or something lurking in the dimness, watching. Suddenly, the kitchen plunged into silence again, but my heartbeat echoed in the stillness, louder than ever. I felt the weight of a decision pressing down on me. Would I face whatever was waiting in the shadows? Or was that just the beginning of a much darker journey? I stood frozen, my eyes locked on the shadow in the corner. It didn't move, but I could feel its presence pinning me in place. My instincts screamed at me to flee, yet curiosity held me there. I blinked, half expecting it to disappear, but it remained, dark and solid. Who's there? I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. No response. The kitchen felt charged again, but this time it was charged with something uneasy, a tension ready to snap. I took a cautious step forward, my foot barely hitting the ground. Then, just like that, the silhouette shifted closer. My breath caught in my throat. I could finally make out the shape of a figure not human but something more distorted. I strained to see, but it was too murky. Suddenly, the figure dove back into the shadows. Panic surged through me. I wheeled around to the stove, desperately searching for comfort in its warm glow. What do you want? I shouted into the stillness. The flames flickered in response, casting strange shapes on the walls. Embrace the past, the voice echoed again, almost playful yet haunting. It felt like the room itself was alive, breathing with me, urging me to confront what lurked just out of sight. With a sudden resolve, I grabbed the note again and read it aloud. Moments of joy and sorrow, a sprinkle of laughter, tears for the soul. Each word hung in the air like a pulse. As I finished speaking, the shadow returned. This time it edged closer, almost daring me to react. I could make out a visage that looked eerily like my grandmother, yet twisted and hollow. A chill ran down my spine. I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance. Show me, I hissed, feeling both foolish and desperate. Show me the truth. The shadow paused, then stretched towards the stove. The flames roared to life, almost gesturing for me to follow. Could it really reveal something? My heart raced, torn between desire for knowledge and fear of what might come. I took another step towards the flickering light, willing myself to keep going. The whispers returned, more insistent this time. The past is written, but you must read it. I kept my eyes locked on the figure as it moved like smoke. I could barely breathe, yet my feet carried me closer to the hearth. The vivid flames glinted off something shiny and old, tarnished spoon half buried in the ashes. What is that? I muttered as I knelt, brushing the ash away. Just as my fingers touched the handle, the shadows shifted violently. A deep rumble filled the kitchen, shaking the very walls. I looked back, and for a second, the figure morphed into something even darker, something threatening. Then everything went dark. The light from the stove flickered out, plunging me into the cold, suffocating darkness. I scrambled to stand, panic surging as I called out, "No. Not like this." I felt the walls closing in, and I reached desperately for the countertop, but it felt like it was slipping away. Was this the price for unearthing the truth? As dread settled in my bones, I caught a whisper in the darkness, clearer now. The truth, you must find it. A sudden flash cut through the void, illuminating the room for just a heartbeat, a glimpse of the spoon in my hand. The moment vanished, leaving me in the silence again. I had no idea where this was leading. But one thing was certain, whatever was next wouldn't be easy to face. I stood in the pitch black, the kitchen feeling both familiar and foreign. My fingers still clutched the tarnished spoon, an odd comfort amidst the encroaching terror. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. The only sound was the beating of my heart. I took a breath, trying to calm myself. I turned slowly, scanning the darkness, my eyes straining to catch ghosts in the shadows. "I need to see," I whispered. But nothing answered. With a shaky hand, I moved toward the other side of the kitchen where I remembered the drawer filled with matches. If I could light something, maybe I could push back the darkness. I reached out, groping for the counter, my pulse quickening. Finally, I found the drawer and yanked it open. Inside, I felt around until my fingers brushed against the cool, smooth texture of a box of matches. I pulled it out, almost dropping it in my rush, and fumbled to open the box. With a trembling hand, I struck one against the side. The flame flickered to life, casting brief, warm light. The shadows danced around me, distorting the familiar kitchen into something otherworldly. That's when I noticed the old family portrait hanging slightly askew on the wall, dusty but intact. My grandmother's image stared back at me, her eyes following every movement. I stepped closer, the match burning down toward my fingers. Everything felt wrong. Why had I never noticed this before? The image in the frame shifted, almost blurring, and I blinked hard, convinced it was the darkness playing tricks on me. Then the air changed. I felt the heaviness again, pressing down on me. I glanced back to the stove, hoping for some sign of warmth, but it remained cold and dark, just as it had seconds ago. Suddenly, a low moan echoed through the kitchen, sending chills racing down my spine. I turned, my heart in my throat. "Is someone there?" I called out, gripping the match tight. The shadows shifted, and the figure reappeared, that same hollow face echoing my grandmother's features. This time, it lifted a finger, pointing towards a cabinet door I had never paid attention to before. "The truth, you must find it," it whispered, the voice now filled with urgency. I looked over at the cabinet, a sense of dread pooling in my stomach. I moved toward it, the match illuminating the dark wood. The figure melted into the shadows. "Don't leave!" I shouted, but it was gone. I stood there, match trembling in my hand, mind racing. Should I open the cabinet? What was inside? Memories flooded back me as a child, laughter, family gatherings, but along with them came the biting edge of unspoken words and hidden pain. With a deep breath, I flicked the match against the side of the box. It died, plunging me into darkness again. Gritting my teeth, I fumbled for another match, my fingers shaking, heart pounding, as I lit it one more time. The flames flickered, and my resolve firmed. Whatever was inside that cabinet, I needed to know. "I'm coming for the truth," I murmured to no one, and as the room pulsed with energy, I pushed the cabinet door open. That's when I saw a dusty journal, lying atop a pile of forgotten memories. My breath caught. What secrets lay within its pages? I reached for the journal, a chill running through me as my fingers brushed against the worn leather cover. It felt heavy, as if holding all the secrets waiting to be uncovered. I took a step back, flame flickering in my hand, casting wild shadows on the walls. What if I didn't want to know what was inside? But I couldn't resist. I leaned closer, trying to make out the decorative stitching and faded initials on the front. My heart raced. This belonged to my grandmother. She had always kept her thoughts private, but maybe that was about to change. With my other hand, I held the match aloft, ready to illuminate the pages. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with what I might find: old family recipes, memories, or something darker. The match sparked between my fingers. I struck it against the box and watched as the flame ignited. As I opened the journal, the musty smell of old paper wafted up, wrapping around me like a shroud. I flipped to the first page. The handwriting was familiar, neat and careful. April 12, 1975. Today was difficult, but the words began to grow erratic, black ink splattering across the pages. They won't stop coming. I hear them in the walls at night. I scream, but no one can hear me. My heartbeat quickened as I read on, desperation evident in every line. Then the journal shifted. A new entry seemed to break the flow of time. I can hear them whispering my name. The shadows are growing. I don't know how much longer I can hide. It felt as if I was stepping into her fear, her dread spilling onto the pages. Suddenly, the flame flickered hard, catching my attention. I glanced over my shoulder as a cool breeze rattled the window. My heart dropped. The kitchen was still full of shadows, but now I felt something stirring in the corners. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. It's just the wind, I chided myself, focusing back on the journal, but the atmosphere thickened. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Just then, a loud bang came from the other side of the kitchen. I jumped, nearly dropping the match. I turned slowly, my eyes widening. The old stove, the very one where so many meals had been cooked, stood ominously in the dark, its door ajar. "Please, don't," I whispered, dread seeping into my voice. I had never paid attention to that stove before, but now it felt like a portal to my grandmother's past, a past that was coming to life in a way I hadn't expected. The journal slipped from my hands and thudded to the floor, its pages flapping open. I backed away toward the kitchen door, my heart racing. I had to leave. The feeling of urgency pulsed through me. The whispers were returning. And then I heard it, a soft, quickening sound, like someone breathing, coming from the stove. I turned back just in time to see the flames inside flicker to life, illuminating a dark form. Something was stirring within. I felt frozen, fear gripping me tight as I stared at the stove. "What do you want?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. All I got in response was silence, thick and heavy. In that moment, I realized I couldn't ignore this any longer. Whatever was happening here, I was already in too deep. I picked up the journal and rushed out of the kitchen, determined to understand my grandmother's warnings, the whispers from the shadows, and the entity that had lurked in the stove for so long. What awaited me next wasn't going to be easy. But I had to confront it. Would I be strong enough to face the truth? I stumbled into the hallway, heart pounding. I glanced back at the kitchen, half expecting something to dart after me. I felt ridiculous, but fear twisted my insides. As I turned the corner toward the living room, I opened the journal again, wanting to dive deeper into my grandmother's cryptic words. The pages flipped to a new date, each word like a thread pulling me into her past. June 5, 1975. The shadows seem alive in the house. I can feel them lurking, waiting for the right moment. My fingers traced the ink, and I shuddered. It was as if she had been writing about something that had never left. I stopped abruptly. Hadn't she spoken about some kind of ritual in her later entries? My eyes scanned the pages, desperate to find the information. There it was. "We must never light the stove at midnight." Each letter sunk in hard. Had my grandmother known? The stove had always put off an aura of warmth, a supposed comfort that now felt like a stone-cold warning. I had already forgotten that feeling of safety in the home where I once played as a child. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the living room. I nearly dropped the journal again. I held my breath, paralyzed by fear. My heart raced. What was happening? Cautiously, I peeked around the doorway. The source of the noise became clear. The old bookshelf once filled with my grandmother's novels had toppled over, books splaying across the floor. Dust swirled in the slivers of moonlight, and I barely noticed that the shadows had thickened around me. "Stay calm," I muttered, gripping the journal tighter. I needed to find answers. As I entered the room, I kicked aside a couple of fallen books. I couldn't shake the feeling of being in a haunted place, reliving dark moments of someone else's despair. Then I spotted something gleaming. There, amongst the fallen volumes, was an antique locket, a deep crimson gem set within a silver frame. I knelt to inspect it, recognizing the design. My grandmother used to wear it. But was this lost, or had it been deliberately placed for me to find? Uncertain, I opened it. Inside, I found a faded photograph of a woman I didn't recognize. And there, beside her, was another figure, partially obscured by shadows. Something dark twisted in my gut. Who was she? As I sat back, the whispers returned, clearer now as if the house were alive again. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, some things should remain buried. Frantic, I shoved the locket into my pocket, the urge to flee burning my muscles. Just as I tried to rise, a shadow flickered to life across the wall, far too familiar. I shot to my feet. Something in the kitchen moved again. This time, it was stronger, more insistent. I could almost hear it calling my name. Fear was morphing into something else: determination. Whatever was happening, I needed to confront it. I had to return to the stove. But as I turned to the kitchen, light flickered wildly behind me. I could hear rustling, breathing, close enough to feel the heat against my skin. I needed to act fast. Would I discover the truth or unleash something that was never meant to be found? I stepped into the kitchen, the air thick with unease. The stove sat silently, an innocuous relic from a time long past. I felt the heat radiating from it, but now it felt like a siren-esque call. I glanced back toward the living room, my every instinct screaming to run. But I couldn't turn my back on the very thing that might hold the key to my grandmother's shadows. A flicker caught my eye. The burner knobs glimmered as if beckoning me. Against better judgment, I approached. My heart pounded louder with every step, but I needed to understand. What had she meant by the ritual? What darkness lay buried within these walls? Suddenly, the lights above me began to flicker erratically, casting buzzing shadows across counters and cupboards. I felt drop in temperature, a chill that took root in my bones. I wanted to turn and flee, but I forced myself to stay. The journal had pointed me here for a reason. I reached the stove and pressed my hand against the cold surface. The metal felt dead, but I could still feel the story it held. Then, I noticed something odd: a small, concealed drawer beneath the stove. It wasn't built like the others. It had no handle, just a subtle seam that likely had gone unnoticed for years. I pulled at it with trembling fingers, and the drawer gave way, producing a hollow sound that echoed ominously. Inside was an old iron key, worn but ornate, its design intricate. The weight of it felt heavy in my palm, almost threatening. Why hadn't I remembered this? Had my grandmother kept secrets even from me? That's when I heard it again, a whisper, barely audible. My name. This time it was clearer, louder, reverberating in my ears. Elena. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. It was impossible. There was no way I was hearing her voice. It didn't make sense. Still, the call was there, persistent like a distant drum. Drawing me back. The kitchen door swung shut with a soft click behind me. Panic surged within me, fueling my instincts. I turned, but the light flickered again, shadows dancing madly. I pressed the key against the stove, but instead of unlocking something, it felt like it was holding me prisoner. Suddenly, I remembered something. In her journal, my grandmother had warned, the key can unlock what was never meant to be freed. My heart raced as I understood the implications. Whatever darkness had been hidden here, it echoed with every secret my grandmother buried. What was waiting for me just beyond that door? I could feel it, strong and hungry. Gathering my courage, I stepped to the side, heart hammering, and opened the drawer again. This time, I fished out a small parchment wedged tightly within it. When I pulled it free, the edge ripped slightly, and a pungent smell filled the air like burnt herbs and something too sweet. I hesitated, knowing I was on the precipice of uncovering the family secrets that had plagued me from childhood. As I finally unfolded the parchment, the lights above went dark, plunging me into an impenetrable blackness. In that pitch blackness, the whisper returned, thick with urgency. "Elena, don't." Then everything went silent. What had I really unleashed? I stood in total darkness, my heart racing as the silence deafened me. I strained to hear anything, but the only sound was my own breathing. The smell from the parchment grew stronger, wrapping around me like a cold mist. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, patiently waiting for my next move. Slowly, I reached out, searching for anything in the darkness. My hand brushed against the stove. Despite its cold surface, it felt alive under my touch, pulsing with an energy I couldn't understand. Panic clawed at my throat, but I couldn't leave. "Not now." The whisper returned, sharper this time. "Elena." It held an urgency that sent shivers through me. I knew that voice. It was my grandmother's, echoing with a warning, but the words were lost in the void. I cleared my throat, my voice trembling as I called out, "What do you want?" For a moment, nothing answered. Then I heard it, a scraping sound, like nails against wood. It came from behind the kitchen door. My heart pounded louder, drowning out the whispers. I shot a glance over my shoulder, wishing desperately for the warmth of the living room light. Should I stay or run? Curiosity tangled with fear, but I forced myself to take measured steps toward the door. I reached the handle, feeling all too aware of the iron key still clutched in my hand. The weight of it grounded me, but now I wasn't sure if it was a blessing or a curse. The scraping grew more insistent, and I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I turned the handle slowly and pushed the door open, half expecting a rush of wind or something worse. Instead, I was met with a low hum that filled the air. Peering through the dimness, I saw shadows rippling as if the world beyond the door was alive and shifting. And then out in that hazy light, I noticed a small figure, hunched and gaunt, standing at the far end of the hallway. It looked at me, and the moment stretched unbearably. I couldn't breathe as I searched for recognition. My grandmother had told stories of spirits lingering in the house, but nothing prepared me for the reality of that otherworldly presence. "Are you?" I stammered, but the words faded in the thick atmosphere. The figure raised its head, and I caught a flash of familiar eyes, deep, sad, yet filled with something else, something darker. Before I could process what I was seeing, the figure darted toward me in a blur of motion, pulling the shadows in its wake. I stumbled back, my heart crashing like thunder as I collided with the cold stove. The lights flickered back on, painful brightness flooding the kitchen. The figure was gone, but I could still feel its imprint in the air, heavy and suffocating. In an instant, the parchment slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. As I bent to grab it, a picture caught my attention, a hastily drawn symbol on the back. My breath caught as I recognized it from my grandmother's journal. This had something to do with her ritual. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed from the living room, ordinary and yet completely wrong. Someone was in the house. I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was just beginning to unfold. What had my grandmother summoned, and was it already too late to put it back? I needed answers, and I was about to confront the heart of it all. I felt the pounding of my heart as I stood in the kitchen, my grandmother's journal clutched tightly in my hand, the weight of secrets heavy upon me. The sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing through the hallway like a warning bell. The warmth from the stove flickered, casting eerie shadows that lengthened as if something unseen loomed in the dark corners of the room. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice quaking as I faced the kitchen door, daring to hope it was someone real, someone who could help me. But the walls returned nothing but a deafening silence. Then, I heard it again, a whisper, cool and familiar, curling around my consciousness. "Elena." A chill crept over me, but I held my ground. If I had ever needed clarity, it was now. I needed to unlock whatever had been buried in these walls. Cautiously, I glanced at the boundary where the kitchen merged with the hallway, a thin veil of darkness waiting just outside. Drawing a deep breath, I turned back to the stove, my resolve strengthening. You want me to remember? What do you want me to see? I could feel the energies swirling around me, like the stirring winds before a storm. The whispers surged in response, rising in urgency. Find us, embrace the truth. It felt like a beckoning from my grandmother herself, a call to confront whatever haunted this house. I walked to the stove, understanding now that it was the heart of this mystery. With trembling hands, I reached for the key in my pocket. Was this truly what I needed? This time, I placed the key into the drawer beneath the stove, turning it slowly. An almost imperceptible click echoed in the still air. The drawer slid open, revealing a hollow space filled with dusty relics, a few jars, faded remnants of ingredients, and a small mirror that shimmered as if streaked with memories. My breath caught as I glanced upon the mirror's surface. What did it reflect? Instinctively, I leaned closer, and the whispers returned, filling my ears with words long forgotten. Look deeper, they urged, coaxing me. I peered into the glass, and to my shock, familiar faces began to emerge within. My grandmother smiled back at me, aglow with happiness. But the image twisted. Instead of peace, her expression shifted, darkening into conflict as shadows swirled around her. I could feel her fear, see the desperation in her eyes. Help us, a voice echoed through the visions. It was her, desperately reaching out through time. The warmth radiating from the stove enveloped me, pulsating with energy that intertwined with the memories I was seeing, moments of laughter overshadowed by grief. Remember. Then suddenly, the image fractured. I gasped as the mirror shattered, each shard revealing snippets of my family's past, a falling out between siblings, the passing of years with heavy burdens, love turned to loss. The whispers grew frantic, he must not find us. In that moment, realization crashed over me like breaking waves. The darkness that had settled upon the house had roots tangled in our family tree. My grandmother had tried to appease spirits that couldn't be satisfied, struggling with the pain of loss herself. They hadn't wanted to be forgotten, lost in the annals of time. Before I could fully comprehend what I had learned, the footsteps grew louder, closer, echoing into the kitchen. With a gust of urgency, I snatched the mirror shards and scattered them over the ashes in the stove. It felt right, a binding act. Perhaps they would find their place in the memory broth that the others had once chased away. The voices of the unseen crescendoed around me. Embrace the truth. As the last fragment touched the pit, a blinding light erupted from the stove, illuminating the kitchen in hues of warmth and brilliance. The air transformed, swirling with all the emotions long buried. I pulled my hands back, heart racing, as a figure draped in darkness stepped forward from the shadows. But this time, it revealed a face I recognized, lips stretched in a wistful smile. My grandmother stood before me, her essence flickering through the haze. You've come to save us, she enveloped me in her spirit. What is it you wanted? I gasped, tears starting to form. Don't forget. Embrace the past, but don't let it tie you down. We are watching, we are here. As she began to dissolve back into the light, the memories seemed to lift off my shoulders. Pain echoed but was met with acceptance. Still entranced in a haze, I felt the weight of the moment I had initiated. The lights flickered again. Elena, remember? Her voice faded, and I stood alone with the warmth of the stove upon my skin, the lingering chill in the air a reminder of the shadows that still danced within. I took a step back, breathless, absorbing everything, the kitchen full of untold lives. I didn't have all the answers, and I doubted I ever would. But one thing was clear, the warmth would return, and the memories of those we loved would endure. I didn't need to understand everything, I just needed to remember. I left the farmhouse the next day, knowing I couldn't stay in this crucible of memory. I never went back, but sometimes, late at night, I still ponder the kitchen, the whispers, and the spirits tied to the earth. Had they truly been there, or was it all a story? I suppose I would never know. But maybe, that's just how it was meant to be, stories unfolding with every turn of time.